Hello and welcome everybody to the next installation of the SAFE Monarchs webinar series. I am Zach Gazan with Disney Conservation, and I'm really excited about this topic. This is one, especially coming out of the AZA conference in Baltimore. It was so fabulous to see so many of you, chat with you, talk to you about the programs that you currently have going. And one of the topics that always comes up is a desire to have more networking opportunities, which is what we're trying to accomplish with this webinar series, and put more time and labor back into your hands by providing resources. And one of the things that we really tried to emphasize at the AZA conference is that there's really no need to reinvent the wheel, because there are so many fantastic organizations and educational products and programs available to you to put into the hands of your educators and ultimately your guests to try to inspire them to have a conservation impact around, the charismatic monarch butterfly. So this is a phenomenal series that should be really relevant to all of us, which is navigating educational resources. No need to reinvent the wheel. There's so much out there. And so we've got a fantastic speaker or speakers today. Also, I will just preview that the fall Monarch migration toolkit is updated and available as of today. So I will share that out today to everybody here, and then also send it out afterwards. That has phenomenal resources to programs, information on what you can do. It has to create habitat that is regionally specific and time of year specific. So just great resources there. If you are unsure what to do with this toolkit, I've got tools for you as well, because our first SAFE Monarch webinar was on utilizing the toolkit, how to use it, what it is, how to get the most out of it. So you can go back and revisit that webinar if you feel like you need a refresher on how to actually use that fantastic document. And thanks to everybody who helped put that together. But that's enough for me. I want to kick it off and hear from fresh voices. I'm very excited to introduce Sam Brewer. She's coming to us from the National Phenology Network, and she's going to tell us about some of the fantastic opportunities that we can do to get our guests involved, helping collect data and see what's going on with monarchs out there. Welcome, Sam. Thank you so much.
Hi, Zach. Thank you so much. Thank you guys all for having me today. So my name is Samatha Brewer, and I'm the volunteer engagement coordinator with the United States National Phenology Network. And I'm here to talk about how you can incorporate citizen science into your Monarch SAFE program, and also be able to encourage your guests and visitors to also be able to collect data for citizen science and monitor phenology, not just at the zoos, but in their own backyards as well. So I'm going to share my screen here. All right, can we see that okay? All right, cool. So I'm here from the National Phenology Network, and I'm going to talk a little bit about who we are. But yes, I'm here today to talk about how to incorporate Nature's Notebook into your current educational programming. So the United States National Phenology Network, so who we are. So we are an organization that collects, stores, and shares phenology data and information. And there's a lot of reasons why we would be collecting and sharing this information. The data that's collected through Nature's Notebook, which is collected by volunteer observers or students or guests, is used to help managers make decisions. It's used to help advance science and our scientific knowledge. We use this program to be able to communicate and connect with the communities around us and the people that we regularly interact with. And also we focus a lot on creating an equitable and inclusive network so that anybody, whatever your background is, can actually contribute to this data. And also you can use this data to help further your own project's understanding of phenology and what's going on at your site, and being able to pass that information on to your constituents. So what is phenology? So what phenology is it's the study of reoccurring cycles of plants and animals throughout the year. So spring, summer, fall, winter, plants, for example, will grow, they'll flower, some of them will lose their leaves, and some will go dormant over the winter to come back year round, right? So there's that cyclical nature of plants. Animals also have, phenology that we can monitor and observe. So monarch butterflies, for example, you'll have your caterpillars that will pupate, they'll grow into adults, they'll migrate, they'll breed, and continue the line. So studying those year-on-year occurrences is what phenology is all about. And phenology is really interesting because it's not always, exactly the same. Like, yes, we can generally predict when we might expect to see caterpillars, but especially with climate change and other abiotic factors, the phenology of plants and animals could be changing from year to year as well. So phenology is just really great because it can be used as an indicator to see how the planet is responding to climate change and how plants and animals might be responding to climate change. There have been several studies which have been done using data collected through Nature's Notebook that's actually shown phenological shifts with shifts of earlier springs. You can see shifts in phenology as well as weather patterns change. And there's many applications of how we can use phenology, right? So we can use phenology to see, like, okay, are plants blooming at an appropriate time when pollinators need to actually use that nectar to migrate, right? So because if we see shifts in patterns of phenology, you can actually have phenological mismatches where if a plant is blooming earlier than expected before a certain animal is ready to come out and use that plant, there could be a mismatch where the timing doesn't coincide very well and it can be detrimental to those animals. We can also use phenology to predict when there's going to be a lot of pollen. So allergies can actually be affected by phenology. There's several researchers who are studying phenology and pollen and allergies. We can use it to look at planting seasons. So people who rely on the seasonal changes in their plants and their gardening for food can be really important. And also for invasive species management. So here in Arizona, we have a problem with bufflegrass, which is an invasive species of grass. But we can use phenology and looking at rain patterns so that we can inform managers when is an optimal time for trying to manage bufflegrass in their area. And so phenology and citizen science. So when you're looking at major changes and shifts in plants and animals all across the United States, it's helpful to get information from as many sources as you can. So citizen science is such a great tool for studying phenology because you can get data from people all across the United States. And so it's not just Nature's Notebook and the USA NPN that looks at phenology. Journey North is a great source for looking at monarch phenology. iNaturalist, I think a lot of you guys like to use iNaturalist as well with your guests. That's such a great one because you can kind of take those snapshots. You can learn about the species that you're observing and also collect data. And Project Budburst is one that looks at the phenology of certain trees in the eastern United States. And SciStarter is just a great resource for different types of citizen science projects. With Nature's Notebook, we have over 22,400 active observers. These are people who are actually collecting phenology data across the United States at 17,000 different sites. And we just reached this huge milestone where we've collected actually 30 million records of phenology data. So this is a national program that is across the United States, which is great because if at your zoo you were collecting this phenology data, a lot of people wonder, like, why are we collecting this data? But when you collectively look at the data across the United States, you can really start to see some interesting patterns. And so each of your programs could be part of a bigger piece of that puzzle. Nature's Notebook is kind of unique in the way that we collect phenology data. So like with iNaturalist, you kind of take those snapshots of the plant and animal that you're observing. With Nature's Notebook, we look more for trying to get observations over time and consistent observations over time. Because if you just take like that one snapshot of that plant and animal and what it's doing, it's hard to put it into the bigger picture. Sometimes it's good when you've got like a lot of people collecting data. But at your particular site with Nature's Notebook, what you can do is basically we're saying, like, what stage of phenology are you looking at, right? So are your plants that's showing leaves or flowers or open flowers or flower buds. So for example, this is a desert milkweed plant. So if I was observing this desert milkweed at my site, I could say like, yes, there are flowers on this plant. Yes, there are open flowers on this plant. Yes, there are leaves of this plant. And actually I see a fruit right here in the background as well. So like if you're fruiting. So with Nature's Notebook, you're actually just looking at that plant and animal. Are there leaves? Yes or no? Are there flowers? Yes or no? Are there open flowers? Yes or no, right? And so earlier in the year, you might be saying, no, there's no flowers. But if you go every week and continue to monitor this plant, yes, now we're seeing when the flowers are appearing. Yes, we're seeing when the fruits are appearing. And you can get that idea throughout the year of how the plants and animals at your site are changing. And a lot of times when we think of phenology, we do think about plants, but we actually, with Nature's Notebook, there's several animal and pollinator species that you can monitor, including monarch butterflies. So for example, with monarchs, you can also look at the phenology of monarchs. So here we have a picture of a monarch adult and a monarch caterpillar. We can say, yes, we see an adult monarch, it's feeding, it's visiting flowers. This one in particular might not be migrating right now, or at least we're not observing it right now. But we can also say, yes, I saw a caterpillar feeding, but I don't see any pupae on my site right now. So you can monitor not just the plants, but the pollinators at your garden. For Monarch SAFE specifically, we have over 26 milkweed species that are available to monitor through Nature's Notebook. We have over 1,300 plants and animals that are available to be monitored. And it's not just monarchs that you can monitor at your site as well. So I know that many zoos and aquaria have pollinator gardens. So your volunteers or even your guests could actually monitor different bee genre that could be at your site as well. So are you guys seeing bumblebees or mason bees or leafcutter bees? So there's several different bees and butterflies that people can observe at the site, and you can see the patterns of what's actually coming to our pollinator garden. Are these species present? When are these species here? And do they coincide when certain species of flowers are blooming or not? To be able to collect the data, we do have a platform for collecting the data. We do have an app with Nature's Notebook. So if you have docents who come regularly or volunteers who would like to monitor plants or pollinators at your site, you can have them use a tablet, or they could even use their own phones, but they can collect that data and you guys would be able to see all the data that's collected at your site. And we have several data collection campaigns as well. So specifically for monarchs, we have a nectar connectors campaign where we're actually looking at, or scientists are looking at, nectar species across the country, seeing when they're blooming and when that nectar is available for monarchs specifically as they go through their migrations. This is really important for land managers too, for determining like what flower species are available. Are there species that we might want to plant? So this Time to Restore campaign, they're actually studying different flower species. So when people are doing native restoration work, we're seeing what species are best to be able to have available for monarchs as they go through their migrations. Also, right now in Arizona, we're working on a desert refuge project with the Desert Botanical Garden and Monarch Joint Venture for studying monarchs and milkweeds in Arizona, because Arizona specifically is an interesting one with monarchs because they'll actually breed over the winter here, and we get migrations that kind of go through our state to both the eastern and western United States. The data that's collected with Nature's Notebook is actually freely available to download. So anybody who's interested in the data that we're collecting, this is one thing we really like about our program. So any scientist who's interested in this data is able to freely record it and be able to use that data for scientific studies. And several papers, or I say several, but like hundreds of papers have been published using data through Nature's Notebook and through the citizen science collection. Specifically, one that we found that does affect monarchs is, for example, like common milkweed flowering date has been shifting in response to climate change. And then we had a student at the University of Arizona do their PhD dissertation on restoring food change for monarch butterflies. So some of the science that's collected, or some of the data that's collected for monarchs specifically, is used for scientific research. And I won't go into that too much, but one thing I do want to note is if you want to do a citizen science project at your zoo using Nature's Notebook, we actually have a visualization tool, which makes it really easy for you to be able to engage with your guests with school groups and with your volunteers, because it's really easy for you to actually access your data and be able to make visualizations with it that you could pop up and put in like in your newsletters. If you're doing educational programming, you can have students and schools come and they can collect data and they can actually chart the data as well. And you can actually make education kind of materials where you're saying like, hey, look at the data from Reed Park Zoo, for example. What's it telling us about monarchs? And I'm going to really quick just show you this visualization tool. So I used to be an educator at the Reed Park Zoo, which is how I got started with Nature's Notebook, is we were monitoring plants and pollinators at our pollinator garden. And so I pulled up this visualization here. So we're using data from the Reed Park Zoo. And here I just pulled up a graph showing like our active individuals of monarchs when they were caterpillars, and even some observations of egg laying. So you can actually show what the monarchs were doing at your site. It's really easy to use our visualization tool as well, where you can add curves. So let's see in 2021, when the butterfly milkweed was flowering, open flowers. I'll give it a minute to think. But yes, you can actually choose different phenophases and different plants and animals and put them onto these visualizations so that you can let people know, like, look at the data that you've collected, and this is what we found with the data. And over time, when you're doing this over several years, you could probably see larger patterns or any sort of potential phenological shifts, or just any sort of correlations between when certain insects are coming to your pollinator garden versus when the plants are actually blooming. So it's kind of fun that you can make those connections. And that's what I really like about our program, is you can be tailored to whatever it is that your particular organization needs. There's different ways to participate. So like you could start a phenology program at your zoo. So if at your zoo, you might be starting a local phenology program where volunteers and guests could come and contribute data. But another way to be able to engage your guests is that we have many backyard observers. So people who just observe from their backyard. So you can encourage your guests to, like, hey, if you plant a milkweed plant in your yard, you can collect these data on it and put it towards this larger collection of data that scientists really can use to study phenological shifts. So by encouraging them to plant milkweeds in their yards, not only are they planting habitats and creating habitats for monarchs, but they can monitor those habitats with Nature's Notebook and also be contributing towards that citizen science data. We have many organizations that we work with and help contribute to this data. So yes, this has been a long ongoing program. We've been working since about 2009, collecting this phenology data. And just different organizations that contribute. So we have lots of botanical gardens, colleges, and universities. There's K through 12 schools. So I know a lot of you guys work with K through 12 schools, but schools can also start their own phenology programs. They could even compare with that visualization tool. They can compare the data that they collect at their school with the data that has been collected at your zoo. So you can actually create these kind of collaborations with schools in your area to be able to compare data and encourage them to collect that data. We also have lots of education resources. I know we're looking at education resources today, but we do have education resources. We have lesson plans that adhere to national education standards. But if you're interested in any PDFs of any of our materials, we have them for different grade levels. We do have some where you're specifically looking at monarch data, where classes can look at monarch data, and you can teach them how to actually read these graphs. Like, what do these graphs mean? What does this mean for monarchs? Are we seeing any sort of shifts? But yeah, thank you guys so much for your time. If you need to contact me, you can reach me at samantha@usanpn.org. But I would love to hear any questions that any of you may have. Thank you.
Thanks, Samantha. And sorry, everybody, I was having some technical difficulties with my Zoom link, but I'm here now. And Samantha, thank you especially for jumping in when I wasn't there.
You're fine. Yeah, that was great.
So I have a few resources that I want to share with all of you on monarchs and monarch education. This is by no means an exhaustive list at all. This is just the things that popped into my head first, or the things that I know are especially useful for the educators and the teachers that I know. And when I'm done, Jen Klotz from the Brandywine Zoo will hop on and share some of the things that they are doing there, things that they've taken inspiration from other SAFE groups, and then we'll transition into questions and some conversation. So go ahead and put things in the Q&A box. I think the chat is disabled, but the Q&A box will work just fine, and we'll have a little bit of a conversation around these types of resources. So the whole point of all of this is to try to keep us from reinventing the wheel, right? There are a whole lot of resources already available. Samatha shared some with NPN and Nature's Notebook, but there are dozens of Monarch programs that are out there that have resources that you can use. MJB is one of them. All of the other SAFE partners on our steering committee, as well as other MJB partners, we all have tons of resources that you're welcome to use for your own programming. But I'm going to share a few things in specific, and then some partner resources, and then I'll switch over to Jen. So we're all here because Monarchs have this inherent magnetism and charisma about them, right? So people love Monarchs, people want to do things with Monarchs, they want to learn more, they want to help Monarchs, but how do we use these interactions as a gateway to conservation action? And it really starts with sending that message that Monarchs can be used in all of these different spaces with different subject areas, with different standards. They're a very personal connection for lots of people, and it really can, having these interactions, even if they're brief, can really set the stage for more conservation-minded futures. So the simple jumping off points that I always tout include learning more and educating others. That's why we're all here, right? We're learning more, we're sharing that knowledge with other people, planting habitat, contributing to Monarch community science programs, and then advocating and supporting other conservation efforts. Because what happens with Monarchs benefits all sorts of other organisms, other pollinators, songbirds, small mammals, birds of prey, right? So everything that we do to help Monarchs benefits some other organisms in some other way. Nothing exists in a vacuum. A former colleague at Monarch Watch once said, we can't conserve one species at the expense of others. And I say that all the time now, right? We love Monarchs, but they're not the only thing that needs saving, and they're not the only thing that is affected by the efforts that we put forth. But the big thing really is to share the joy, right? We're all zoo educators, nature educators. Share the joy of Monarchs with the people that we're interacting with. I think that's really what it boils down to. And that can come in all shapes and sizes, all ages, all backgrounds. Everybody can have their own Monarch story. And you can do these in different ways. You heard Samatha talking about different ways to monitor and look at phenology. And then other things that you could do at your institution, things like planting parties, things like showcasing work of maybe your camps or family program or a school that you're working with, if that's something that they're comfortable with. It could even be something internal to that program, showcasing with other zoo staff or zoo departments if you're trying to get some cross-pollination throughout your institution. That pun was intended. And then of course another big one is having festivals, having parties. Throw a big party for Monarchs. I'm heading to one on Saturday here in Minneapolis. It's not at a zoo, but the Minnesota Zoo will be there. It's the Minneapolis Monarch Festival, and it's a celebration of all things Monarchs, both the insects, the little bug, and all the cultural things around it. And we get 8,000 to 10,000 people there every year, which is exciting. It's a huge thing. It's a big party. People love it, and it really is a great opportunity to engage people in the actions that they can take at home in order to protect Monarchs and other pollinators. And at the festival, there's games and activities and things like that, but we also have plant vendors so that people can actually take that action to the next level. They can start planting things at home. And then of course we have all sorts of resources and conversations about different things that they can do in their own backyards. So some partner resources, both from MJV and from other MJV partners that might be useful to you. The MJV website, if you haven't been on it, there's tons of information there. We've got talking points for different audiences. We've got other webinars. We've got curriculum, our different program areas. We've got our I think I mentioned our webinar series already, our downloads and links page, and then of course our store. That's probably more for a personal thing if you're interested in getting any things from there, but we do have educational materials, curriculum, life cycle cards, posters, things like that that could help you in your interpretation around monarch butterflies. The curriculum was just updated within the last couple of years. We took the pandemic year to take the time to do that. Less going on, then we could focus on some other things. So there's 3 different grade bands: K2, 3rd through 5th, and then middle school. It's definitely geared towards a formal classroom audience. It's closely aligned to next generation science standards. However, I know plenty of non-formal educators that use the activities in this curriculum as well. And if you're interested in learning more about that, I'm happy to have a conversation about that outside of the webinar too. One thing that I do want to promote is the symbolic migration, which is run through both Journey North and Monarchs across Georgia. The symbolic migration is a really fun program that classrooms or small groups can participate in. That essentially you take a class ambassador of a monarch and then all these little butterflies that get sent to schools in Mexico, and then they spend the winter there, just as monarch butterflies would in central Mexico. And then the butterflies return to where they came from, not exactly where they came from. They might go through, you're not going to get the same butterflies back when the monarchs start migrating again in the spring. So it's a really kind of a fun way to incorporate some of the cultural exchanges and experiences around monarch butterflies as well. And then, of course, there's Monarch Citizen Science projects. We heard from NPN earlier. She mentioned iNaturalist and Journey North, which are great ones. But then I also have a few other ones up here that you could potentially participate in as well. Monarch Watch, or if you're in the West, the Southwest Monarch Study does the tagging programs around monarchs. And then also in the West, the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper, maps out where monarchs and milkweed are present. And then if you're trying to get a little bit more in depth, Project Monarch Health looks at that disease, Ophriocistis electrosclera, OE. And then the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project is one that requires, not necessarily requires, but asks for weekly monitoring, although it doesn't have to be weekly if you don't have the time for that. So all of these are programs that you can get involved with. And I saw the question in the chat from Cassandra. In California, we can't handle monarchs directly. What are some ways we can build those connections with guests with monarchs? Great question. Doing some of these citizen science programs can do some of that. So you can do observational things with monarchs. So the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project, the National Phenology Network, iNaturalist, Journey North, Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper are things that you can participate in California. You just aren't able to do tagging or Project Monarch Health or certain parts of the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project because it requires handling and bringing monarchs in from the wild. And then the other focus I would say would be habitat, getting some habitat focuses, around milkweed, native milkweeds especially, in your area, in your region, to showcase what people can plant in their garden and be a resource for what something like that might look like, and not just what it might look like, but how to manage it. How often do you need weed? How often do you need to water? What do you do when the plants start getting out of control, if that's an issue in your area? And just generally kind of being an example, a resource, I guess. And I'm also a big fan of doing those types of activities that more as supplemental, not necessarily as educational, things like crafts and seed balls and making gliders that look like monarch butterflies. Those are all things that can be done at events that are still engaging with monarchs, and you can turn them into educational things. You know, you can talk about what the veins do on the wings of the butterfly. You can talk about how they fly. You can talk about what sorts of resources they need as they migrate. So those are all different ways to engage without actually having monarchs present. And that's something that for everybody else, we haven't talked about it yet, but we should. As a group, the IUCN red listing or red list for announcement that came out this July that put monarchs on the endangered list, on the red list. I know most of you already know that that doesn't come with any federal protections here in the United States. So monarchs currently don't have federal protections, but it's possible that they will soon. They are expected to be listed in 2024, and we don't know what the rules and regulations will be around that. So the things that we're talking about when we talk to California zoos and aquariums around engaging with monarch butterflies is something that we might also need to implement ourselves in other parts of the United States and Canada. So just keep that in mind, that the way that we engage with monarchs now might need to change in the next few years. Before I go into that, I wanted to share, let me share one more thing. I wanted to just share some specific pieces of, or I should say pieces of websites from our partners. So the Journey North website, not only are they a great way to engage with citizen science and monarchs, but they also have a really fantastic resource page that's got, you know, it's got slideshows and articles and photo galleries. And this annual cycle is one I use a lot. It's very Eastern focused, but it's one that I use a lot in interpretation around Minnesota because we're here in the East. But there's some really great resources here. If you go to, and I can share this link in the chat too, and I apologize, my make this a little bit bigger. My Zoom thing is blocking my taskbar at the top. So the field scope link I'll put in the chat, but this is a visualization tool from Journey North that they worked with Field Scope, BSCS, on possible ways to, and actually this isn't one that I wanted. Anyway, I'll find it and I'll share it with you. There's a visualization you can use with Field Scope in cooperation with Journey North to create different data visualizations on the Journey North map. So I'll share that out, or have Zach share that out as a follow-up. I mentioned the symbolic migration, and that's done through the Monarchs. It's co-coordinated with Monarchs across Georgia and Journey North. So the deadline to register for that is October 9th, I believe, this year. And there's information on the Monarchs Across Georgia website, and I'll make sure all of these resources get shared in an email with all of you. But Monarchs Across Georgia also has some really great resources on their website on community science and activities and milkweeds of the Southeast, specifically to Georgia. But they've got some really fun activities that you could look at here that might work for a more informal place like zoos and aquariums. Xerces Society also has some educational resources around monarchs, the different crafts, some scouting exercises and some videos. They've got this activity booklet that's kind of fun for kids as well. I mentioned the Monarch Larva Monitoring Project. There are tools on here, and I'll show you a quick here. If you go to results, monitoring data and graphs, you can get, I'm going to look at Minnesota because that's what I'm most familiar with, but you can look at the data from the entire state where you're at. And if your state doesn't have a lot of data, that could be a goal to get more data from your state. So we've got different sites you can choose from here, but I'm actually going to go to a year. Let's look at this year. Let's see how many people have reported MLNP data for 2022 so far. So far there have been 24 sites monitored in 2022, and this is what the data for monarchs have looked like so far this summer. We've got density on the left, time on the bottom, an average total average sample size each week of 914 plants. And you can get these charts from any year possible. You can get them from all years. So I can choose all years. And this could be a fun activity to do in a program with like high school students, or even as like a staff exercise, just to learn and talk a little bit more about data and how it might change from year to year. I like to point out the differences between the magnitudes on the y-axis here. This one goes up to 0.25. The one on 2022 barely goes past 0.15. So you can talk about how that changes from year to year, the different sorts of stories these data can tell just by looking at these charts. Project Monarch Health also has, I'm on their educators page. They also have some great activities. We've got an educator page here. They've got some classroom activities you could do, giving your monarch a physical. You can talk about population dynamics, scales and spores. So they've got lots of different ways to engage with your visitors here also, mostly through programs. And then one final one that I will share is the National Wildlife Federation also has educational programs. They've got their education and gardening for wildlife programs. So there's some really great resources on the NWF website also. Trying to think if there are more things. Oh, Monarch Watch. I kind of skimmed over Monarch Watch because they don't have as robust of an education resource as some of the other programs, but they do have an education page, a classroom page that's got things like vocabulary and challenges and things like that that you could potentially use to build out some of your education programs. But in general, Monarch Watch also has really great information on monarchs. This is where you would go if you need to order tags if you're east of the Rocky Mountains. And then, as I mentioned, this isn't an exhaustive list. This is not at all everything out there that exists for monarch education or even conservation education around monarchs. I did want to, I have this placeholder here to remind me to stop talking. I have a few coworkers, colleagues at AZA zoos who are going to share some information about what they do. And Rebecca, are you still on? There she is. Okay, I have your slide up if you want to talk a little bit about what Oklahoma City Zoo is doing.
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks a lot for that, Katie-Lyn. We also have a Monarch Awareness Day coming up on Saturday. So fall is an exciting time, as we all know, for monarchs. We're starting to see them here in Oklahoma, and we will have a plant sale with local vendors selling pesticide-free plants, and we'll be having guests help us to plant milkweed also on zoo grounds. But I wanted to talk about another program that we have at OKC Zoo that I thought might be a useful model for other AZA institutions, and that is a program that we have for giving local schools grants to plant pollinator gardens. So we call this our Living Classrooms grant program. We provide $1,500 grants to schools annually. We usually award 5 to 6 of those per year. It's a competitive process. Application goes live in January of each year, and we make our decisions typically by May of that year, and then hold some teacher workshops in the fall, which train the teachers how to design and plan and install a successful garden for pollinators. And then we also teach them how to use the garden to teach a whole variety of subjects, and essentially just to connect their students with nature and help the students to understand the importance of pollinators and biodiversity in general. So our program is modeled after National Wildlife Federation Schoolyard Habitats program. We actually had some education staff from National Wildlife Federation come a few years ago to OKC Zoo to teach us how they teach this program. So ours is is based on theirs. We do provide National Wildlife Federation's Monarch Mission curriculum as part of our teacher workshop training, as well as resources from other curriculum like MJV's Monarchs and More that Katie-Lyn just talked about. So we've funded 23 schools so far. And we actually, the way that we fund this grant program is by selling paintings that our animals do. So I know a lot of zoos have similar programs where their animals create paintings. And for us, that generates enough money that we can provide these grants and teacher workshops annually. Thanks.
I love that. The way that you're funding the programs. I wish I could have a bunch of, MJV also has a garden grant program, but it's funded specifically around our workshops. But if I could have animals that painted things for me to raise funds, maybe I'll get those caterpillars on that.
Good idea.
And then Jen, do you want to, I'll stop sharing my screen here. Do you want to pop on and talk a little bit about what Brandywine Zoo is doing? You're muted still. There we go.
I thought I hit it. It tricked me. Yeah, this is great. I'm glad to be here for it. I've been watching these webinars and, you know, some of you in particular on various talks all year since joining Brandywine Zoo. And even have my Monarch earrings. They don't match at all, but I had to put them on. So at Brandywine Zoo, we are definitely a small facility. It's only 5 acres. So, you know, not immense staff, not, well, I don't actually know what our budget, what our money looks like. I'm not high enough up to know that, but you know, it's a small place, so we have to kind of work with what we can. We've been a partner since 2020. So in that time, trying to find the things that we can do on site or in the community that, you know, can be managed with maybe less funds and less staffing. So my position actually exists due to grants. So, you know, looking for grants, even if you're not a grant writer, it might be time to work on that. So peek around for grants, and this position as community engagement lead, that is my role at Brandywine Zoo. It's brand new for the zoo, and it was brought in to essentially get the zoo conservation programs out into the community and work with the surrounding community, expand beyond our gates. So SAFE Monarch is definitely something that we're working with plantings and things like that. So IMLS is where the grant came from for me. So check there. I know they have a lot, but so last year we did, that was pre-grant, but we do have a conservation fund at the zoo. I'm not sure if our animal prints go to that, but we do have the animal print offerings, which are pretty cool. So we had a fall plant sale. It was managed by our conservation intern at the time. So, you know, a good thing for her, her resume. So there was a pre-sale. It was in the fall because there's a large arts festival that takes place in the park surrounding the zoo. So trying to take advantage of those things as well as, you know, you think outside the box, outside the gates of the zoo, what's going on around you, you know, creating days or events at that time is a good way to get people through the door. And it was a big success. So I did a plant sale this past Memorial Day weekend. No pre-sale because we tend to get so many guests during that time. And I took a gamble and it paid off, and we were able to sell everything, all pollinators, natives, pesticide free. So those plants were paid for by the grant. The previous year it was the conservation fund. So we intend to continue with at least an annual sale, ideally spring and fall, but at least annual. In the past and hopefully in the future, we have participated with University of Michigan. They have the M3 Monarch migration study. It's essentially a device that you put somewhere on your facility and it's capturing weather data. So again, very little staff needed and zero funding, but it's great participation in a conservation program. So all that information goes to them and they can compile as needed. We are having a celebration specifically for monarchs coming up in October on the 1st. And that was direct inspiration from one of these seminars I attended earlier this year. I'm not sure which zoo, but I know a lot do these types of days. So we're going to have, guests invited to wear butterfly clothing, black and white clothing. We're going to have master gardeners and master naturalists on site with potentially caterpillars, butterfly, whatever potential livestock. They're going to do some storybook readings. We have the Lenape tribe who will be here as well, chalk art. And we actually used a map from MJV website for showing the migration that these little animals take twice a year. So definitely want, shout out there. It's a great map and resource there. We've had pollinator gardens go in and we have another one just around the corner next week. So obviously a lot of signage for that. Volunteers are prepping the space and actually planting the gardens, which, helps with that kind of community outreach and also requires less from staff, leveraging those volunteers to help you out as much as possible. Always helpful. And we have a dedicated web page to SAFE Monarch. Again, just simple kind of stuff that has a big impact. There's a lot of links to citizen science programs. So information for what guests can do and visitors can do, plus what we're doing at the zoo for monarch butterflies. And future-wise, we're looking into, kind of continuing some of those things. We want to check out the Mayor's Monarch Pledge to see if we can get that going in Wilmington and what we can do to help with that. Again, doesn't sound like it would be too much staff efforts in that way, but could have a big impact. So trying to find those kind of opportunities basically is the goal. So hopefully some helpful stuff.
That sounds really exciting, Jen. I kind of wish I was going to be there in October. Yeah, I mean, the other thing that I'll add is even if you're not doing things with your guests directly, you can still share what you're doing at your zoo behind the scenes, right? You can share, you see it for all of the other, larger megafauna that are located in North America, right? Elephants and rhinoceroses and things like that. You share what your research teams are doing in other areas. You can do the same thing for what you're doing behind the scenes for monarchs at your zoo as well. There were a couple of questions for Rebecca. How do you get the school applicants, and are they mostly private or also public?
Great question. We post the application on the zoo's website and we announce that in a variety of ways. We have a Oklahoma focused monarch conservation group, so they help us get the word out, and through our educators we get that out to science teachers across the state. It is for K through 12 schools, and it can be private, public, charter, doesn't matter, it's open to all. We usually get about 20 applications annually, and we select the top 5 or 6 of those.
Okay, another question from Tiffany. Monarchs in South Florida seem to be quite complex. Here at Zoo Miami, we have started a program to remove the non-native tropical milkweed and educate guests about the natives, but it's quite difficult since the natives are hard to find in nurseries due to the rarity. We have social media videos coming out soon to educate residents too. What else would you recommend we do to help? This is an excellent question, and I want to start by saying you're not the only ones that are looking for answers to this or who have issues finding the native milkweeds. They are hard to find in many areas because not all milkweeds are easy to propagate, and not all milkweeds ship well. Many of them either don't like to be in a pot, or they don't like to be moved, or both. And so that makes it extra challenging to find the ones that grow well in a propagated setting. And I think this could be a really great advocacy opportunity, not just political advocacy for, you know, your elected officials and things like that, but also working with your guests to talk to nurseries, you know, create a campaign to talk to the nurseries in your area and say that there's a demand for these native milkweeds, so let's figure out how to grow them. I know that the Desert Botanic Garden is working on some desert milkweed propagation and best ways to do that. So look in your area to see if there are other organizations that are working on similar types of things that can help make native milkweeds more available. And I think, and you didn't mention, Tiffany, what your videos will include, but I think it's also something to think about too, is helping to shift the narrative or shift the public acceptance of different of a new aesthetic, right? Of less annual formal planned type gardens and more of a neat wild space, right? You know, Zach, you were talking last week at AZA about the needs for our gardens, our grounds to look beautiful. So what does the new beautiful look like? And can we still do that with native plants? So I think that's something, if you can be the example for some of that at your institution of, you know, what a beautiful native garden can look like, that looks well kept, well maintained, always has something in bloom, but still is leaving some things that are no longer in bloom for nesting sites for other native pollinators. The more people see that in public spaces, the more likely they are to want to do that at home. So I think that could be another great example of engaging with the public in different ways. And Jen and Rebecca or Zach, I don't know if you have anything else to add about what your zoos are doing.
Yeah, well, I'll just add that this is a challenge that we also have, you know, also being in Florida. But I will say that Jarrett Daniels up at UF is working hard to try to make different types of native milkweeds more widely available. And so it is a challenge, but something that you know, that people are working on, but it's worth having that conversation and seeing what we can do to make them more widely available. To Katie-Lyn's point, talking about what is the new beautiful, we've tried to add signage to our pollinator gardens to, you know, both educate, but also try to buy some, you know, get people to cut us a little bit of slack that you know, chewed up plants are not necessarily a bad thing. That's a good thing. That means that, you know, we have life living in our gardens, and that's not bad. And then yeah, so but yeah, and then there's also the behavioral you know, things we can talk about in terms of if you have tropical milkweed, cutting it back at appropriate times and when and where to do that.
Are you gonna add anything, Jen?
Oh yeah, I was just thinking we have plantings right outside the zoo gate and a lot of coneflowers, and goldfinches are just all over it right now, and I love it. And of course they look terrible. And so we're getting, the plantings are there because of SAFE Monarch and SAFE Songbird programs that we're in. But we need to tell the public that, because, you know, that's right when they enter, and, you know, they think we're not keeping up with the place. So getting that signage out there will definitely help.
Yep. And then in terms of signage, you know, if you use your own, you know, zoo signage and branding, awesome, that's great. But if you don't want to, or are limited more on resources, there are programs out there like National Wildlife Federation has their certified wildlife habitat. Monarch Watch has the wave station programs. Xerces has a certification program. Pollinator Partnership program. Partnership also has certification programs. And then MJV, we don't have a certification program because they already exist. We don't need to add another one to the pile, but we do have habitat signs. If that's something that you just want the signs, we have them. They exist, but you could also create your own, make it your own with your own programs and branding and all that kind of stuff. So, are there any other questions or challenges or successes that anybody wants to share in the chat or the Q&A? We could also maybe make space for something like this as a little bit of a networking meeting, maybe this winter as we're all winding down from education stuff. Or maybe you guys don't. I do.
I think that's a great idea as we head into, as we get past fall and we all have a bit of downtime from field work and, and we're obviously not doing the, as much of the in-person hands-on Monarch environmental education. We can kind of regroup and rethink what worked, what didn't. Can we share resources? I think that's a fantastic idea. We're just about out of time. So there's one more thing I wanted to plug, which was that I said at the beginning that the new fall Monarch toolkit has just come out. So I'm going to send that into the chat right now. Phenomenal resources. It has tons and tons of link to take you to the many of the things that we talked about today, but it also has lots of information about, regionally and phenologically specific actions that you can take to have an impact and spread the word and try to be more involved. Yeah, so hopefully we're able to help you do what you already do amazingly well, but more efficiently or bigger. And that's really our goal. So I just want to say a huge thank you to everybody that contributed today. Katie-Lyn, as always, our tried and true expert, Jen Klotz, Samatha Brewer from the Phenology Network. Thank you so much for sharing your passion and expertise. I'll be sending out a recording to this session so you can revisit or share with friends. And I'll also send out lots and lots of links because there were so many things that came through today in the presentations that I want to make sure that you can access easily. So thank you so much again, and we will see you next month. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Zach.
Yeah, thank you.